Yo, in Soccer We Trust YouTube fam. First off, did you see that exclusive interview we had with Chelsea's Mason Mount yesterday? If not, go check it out after we're done talking about Landon Donavan potentially taking a job in MLS and something very interesting that US men's national team manager Greg Berhalter said the other day. So hit like and subscribe and let's get after it. Yes, what is up, everybody? And welcome to Charlie Davies' favorite podcast in Soccer We Trust. I'm Jimmy Cream Cheese Conrad alongside only Hollywood Heath Pierce today because Charlie Chuckwagon Davies' second yacht apparently doesn't have Wi-Fi installed yet, but I'm sure it will soon. And on today's show, we're going to talk about Landon Donovan making a managerial move, potentially from the USL to MLS, and some interesting comments made by U.S. men's national team manager Greg Berhalter and how that could impact what players in the national team player pool are deciding to do with their futures this summer as they try to make a late play to get on the World Cup roster. And, of course, how that also impacts their involvement in the team in the next World Cup cycle, which definitely has to be on the mind of some of the players. But first, let's do a recap with Heath about his great interview with Mason Mount. So, Heath, from my experience, about 10 minutes after I do an interview, I always have a moment of, oh, my God, I totally should have asked him that. Did that happen to you with Mason Mount?
I mean, it was a little bit harder because you're going through the lens of a club, right? And the club generally want it to be the interview to be woven through the team, right? That's what they're on. They're promoting the club, the team. So I totally understand that. So it was hard because I wanted to really get into, and I feel like we had the best conversation when we were talking about the national team and a little bit more, less the thing that you're in. And Jimmy, you know, when you're stuck in the middle of a preseason, and not stuck, but when you're in the middle of a preseason and everything's going on, you're overstimulated all day long. Maybe you're doing double sessions. You're tired. You're doing media. Then it's not the most exciting topic talking about your team and stuff. But so there wasn't really one particular thing. I just wish that we could have just kind of hammered down on more national team stuff because obviously through the lens and the angle of this show. But he was a great guy, really, really open and fun and down for a little bit of banter. So and we were running on a pretty tight timeline. So
yeah, of course. I mean, the guy's a superstar, right?
Yeah.
So you can only work on his schedule. But I thought it was very cool that in Soccer We Trust got that type of access. And really, that's due to you being nicknamed Hollywood. It's being proven right now. The evidence is there that when your nickname is Hollywood, it's Hollywood for a reason. And that's because we get to book special guests, just like Mason Mount. All right, let's pivot now to Landon Donovan, potentially being linked to.
Wait, Jimmy, before we go too far, Hector has a question for you in the comment section that says, "Hey, Jimmy, why the two intros every video?"
Oh, well, the two intros every video. One is for YouTube, and the other one is for anybody that's listening on the podcast platform. So I am being told that I got to give you a little teaser, and then I got to give in and give a little bit of a brief pause and let it forward. Because the podcast people that are listening on their platform of choice, make sure you subscribe. If you're listening, follow us on Twitter, ISWT Pod. They also have a different intro. So it's kind of two things at once. We're just playing the game, baby. There's a game afoot, and we're just playing the game. So, Hector, I appreciate you allowing us to give us a shameless plug right now on all the platforms. It's very nice of you to do that and tee us up. Thank you, Heath. All right, now let's pivot to Landon Donovan, potentially going to coach the San Jose Earthquakes, his former club. I was there at San Jose when he came over from Bayer Leverkusen. I picked him up every day to take him to practice. I used to talk to his mom to make sure that everything was going okay with Landon. That's how young he was when he made his move over. Now, obviously, he won 2 MLS Cups with San Jose and then made, let's say, a significant move to a rival, the LA Galaxy, and then went on to win more MLS Cups. The guy, I don't like every other year he's winning an MLS Cup. So I guess there's two things here. Do you think he would consider going to the Quakes? He's 40 years old. He's in his third season as manager of San Diego Loyal. He's also a VP there and you know, very similar to Peter Vermes at Sporting Kansas City, really entrenched in every level. And he's also a part owner, so he's got a little stake in there too. Do you think he wants to leave San Diego to go to the Quakes, which historically hasn't been good, especially with the same ownership group, the Fisher family, to try to work that out? It'd be a big name, of course, but I don't know if I would do it if I was Landon Donovan, with all due respect to the Quakes that are trying to figure it out, obviously.
Yeah, I'm interested in this one just because of the fact that he is a Galaxy legend, but I feel the stakes and the hired to be fired role of a manager at the LA Galaxy would probably supersede Landon Donovan's name at a certain point, right? And so it's kind of one of those things where, is it the right fit? Maybe, maybe not. But then on the flip side, you know, Earthquakes are a rival of his, and they've got a lot to figure out still as a club. They've still got to. Now, if they came in and they gave him a long-term contract and they gave him some control and they allowed him to bring in a team and you hired out the right thing that built a little bit more of a foundation, because I feel like the Earthquakes have always been a little bit about, not always, because back in the day you go to the Clash and things like that, a little more of a foundation, but now seem to be about like sort of quick fixes or trying to get to the finish line as quickly as possible, meaning results or a trophy of some kind. And I feel like a lot of clubs, and it's not just about San Jose Earthquakes, are in this sort of next generation phase where it was very much about MLS was about parity. And now you're starting to see clubs build foundations for success. Now, those are cyclical because we're seeing Atlanta go through their first troubles and others, but they could use somebody like Landon Donavan if they're going to give him the resources around him to come in, set up shop, and build for the future. You know, what's the academy doing right now? Because they've got some talented players actually in the San Jose Earthquakes Academy. They've got a number of other players as well. And so if you can start to put all those pieces together towards what the future of the club looks like, the next generation of the club, then it makes sense. But otherwise, you know, if this is a Band-Aid to go, okay, maybe in the next 2 years we can go for something, I don't think that works for Landon. I don't think that would be a smart move for the club either.
Okay, everybody, if you're listening and or watching, let us know your thoughts on whether you think Landon Donovan should go to the Quakes, and just maybe add how you think he'll do as a manager overall. Now, with the San Diego Loyal, they are currently in third place this year in the Western Conference in the USL Championship, which is considered the second division here in the States. He has a 30 wins, 23 losses, and 15 draws in his managerial career. I don't know how much you know, Heath, about his managerial style, but it feels very European, where he's just overseeing other coaches that are running training, and he'll kind of jump in when he does. I think he's managing the players. He's kind of sitting on top of the pyramid, as it were. And I don't know, it just feels pretty European. I don't know if I could do that. I feel like maybe I like to talk and I like to get my hands dirty and get in the trenches. But it seems to be working for San Diego. And from what I hear with the players, they really like the way that he's doing his job and how the whole thing is set up.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and obviously I want to get your take on Landon to the San Jose Earthquakes as well, and what your actual, like what you think the upside is and what you think the potential risk is. But I think that style could work if you have the right staff, right? You and I both know we've had good head coaches. We've had bad head coaches, probably more. I've had much more bad than good in my personal experiences. Good assistant coaches. I've had more good. I've had more good assistant coaches than I've had good head coaches because they can actually have a really strong impact. And I know people talk about like assistant coaches, like setting up cones and putting out the bibs and those kinds of things and jumping into possession when they need an extra number, but they have a huge impact. And I feel like they can be bigger mentors than a coach can be. And so if he's more removed and you have that relationship and that trust, and you have really good technical coaches and really good ones that are efficient with their messaging, good at motivating players, then I think that could work. I just think, again, and maybe actually with Landon Donovan's personality type, it would work better than him being hands-on. I mean, Jimmy, would you like, knowing Landon as much as you do and as much as I do, I don't know, and people do evolve and grow, but I don't see Landon as somebody who's rah on the field all the time, you know, over talking, things like that, or excited, or not necessarily excited, but like diving into something for long periods. Landon, I don't remember that being necessarily the type of player that he was. Maybe you feel differently.
No, what I'll say is, and I think you probably did this too, maybe we even had conversations about it when we were together with the national team. You sit there and you look around the locker room and you think, I wonder what that guy's going to do when he's done. You know, he'll probably be a director of coaching, you know, for some youth team. He'll go back to his hometown and be the local celebrity in the soccer
When I
circles.
played against Robbie Russell in Denmark, I was like, that guy's going to be a doctor someday. And guess what, Jimmy? I was right.
It's one of those things, you know. I remember going and thinking, Davey Arno, who's now the assistant coach to Josh Wolf at Austin FC. I was like, I wonder what Davey's going to do afterwards. You know, he didn't have much schooling to fall back on because he just jumped and took his opportunities to get into the professional ranks as soon as possible, like anybody would. And there's a lot of guys like that maybe don't have the education to fall back on, like a Robbie Russell. So I was always like, man, Davey, what I wonder, you know. And now he's finding his way and had a short managerial stint as the head coach of the Houston Dynamo, and now he's with Josh and gaining all this really valuable experience that will serve him well and whatever he wants to do moving forward. So I use him as an example because I just really had no idea what he was going to do. With regard to Landon, I didn't think he needed to do anything. Obviously, he had made more than enough money to chill and do whatever the hell he wanted. And he's one of the biggest names in soccer in this country, and could probably pick his sponsors to work with and just be an ambassador for the league. I mean, they named the MVP trophy after him. So he clearly had done enough to kind of rest on his laurels. I like that he's challenging himself, but you also can see as a player how they're going to manage, if they do become a coach, how they're probably going to manage adversity and pressure and expectations. And Landon's really steady. I don't see him when I watch San Diego Loyal games, I don't see him get too over the top. I think he keeps a nice even keel. I think that's important for the team to see as well, that if you're losing your shit on the sideline, then it kind of gives your team that nonverbal license to do the same, and that never ends well. So I like his demeanor on the sideline, and never too high, never too low, keeps it steady. What I think is interesting is that he also dealt with that mental health issue when Jurgen Klinsmann was coaching, when he was still playing. And I think that allows him to be a little more empathetic to what his teammates, or excuse me, what his team is going through, what his players are going through. And the best evidence of that was, of course, when he stood up for Colin Martin after one of his players, Colin Martin, was subjected to an anti-gay slur by then Phoenix Rising forward Junior Fleming. So that whole thing I was really proud of Landon for you don't see coaches do that a lot, where they stand up for their players. So there's something in that type of way. So there's something about that character, that strength, that quiet strength that he has, quiet confidence that he has, that could bode well. I think the Quakes could use his presence. Do I think that's the best situation for him? I guess if you're going to get hired in any situation, and you can talk to Wayne Rooney about this with DC United, you're probably not going to get hired into the best situation of all time. You're there to fix the situation. So the Quakes for me are interesting, because from what I've heard with the Fisher family, the only reason they didn't fire Matias Almeida sooner was because John Fisher, the owner, doesn't like to do that. He's got a policy like, hey, this guy signs his contract, I expect him to honor it. And that
you also have to be willing to pay somebody out that money while they walk away and they're just hanging out,
Right. And I mean, we could argue Matias Almeida at San Jose was trying everything he possibly could to get fired, and the guy just wouldn't do it. So, or John Fisher wouldn't do it. So it's interesting. I do think that they're putting some things in place that are going to allow that club to have some long-term success. And this would be an interesting hire. I just don't know. I mean, let's be honest. If I was in San Diego coaching and everything was going great, I don't know if I'd want to move anywhere, not San Jose, anywhere to leave that kind of situation. So it's an interesting one. I would love to see him do it. And I guess my question back to you and everybody, again, it's another layer to this question about Landon. Do you think he could be a national team coach moving forward?
Wow. I just
lost my light, by the way. Keep going.
Yeah, I thought this is the drop the mic moment of just like, boom, end of show. No, I mean, there's just, as you know, Jimmy, when I was doing my coaching license, you quickly realize just how different coaching is. Now, you apply the same things as you did becoming a player, which is about reps and getting out there and putting in the time and the work and, having the right mindset, but coaching is very, very different. And there's no reason that Landon couldn't be if he got to that level. But I do think that coaching is one of those things. And there's very few phenoms that we know in Europe, and they get celebrated when they're young stars that are coaching from the coaching standpoint. You need to put in time, right? And again, I go back to this time I was here with Rodolfo Burrell, who's the first assistant of Pep Guardiola. A couple of weeks ago, he was here in Manhattan Beach, and he was telling the story
of the day. Hey, 13 minutes in, everybody, we got our first
flex of the day. But what Rodolfo was talking about is that before he became the academy director at Liverpool, he was at Barcelona, and he was at the 14s, 15s, 16s, 17s, 18s, just putting in all this time. And now he's the first assistant to Pep Guardiola. And he's had opportunities to become, sporting director and other things like that at pretty good sized clubs. But what he was talking about is this pathway of the coach. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting and maybe a little bit too in depth for everybody. But
no way, I'm in. I'm all ears right now.
In the U.S., the way the system is built is that the U16 makes more than the 15s, the 17s makes more than the 18s, the 19s makes more than the 18s, and then you have academy director, and then you have first team assistants. There's a sliding scale that suggests
salary
that suggests that the higher level that you are coaching at, the higher the division, the more money you make. And he was going through this whole process of how, in order to recruit from
the other way
from Liverpool to City, some of the staff that he brought over, it's got to be the other way. If you want your U14s, if you've got this crop of talent, you've got to pay that guy the right way. So he wants to be a U14 coach, because otherwise they're all skipping the ages to go up to the age group that's going to pay them the most money, but they're missing out on what the player development is like at 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. It's very different. How you coach, how you speak to them, how you develop, what the training plans are, all those things. So then they all just skip up to wanting to be as high as possible, as quick as possible, and they miss out on all this learning. And so the point I'm getting to with the coaching side with Landon Donavan is that he's jumped into this head coaching world, and it's in the lower division. He's able to like probably be a little bit more hands-on than he would otherwise, right? In terms of the pressure on him, the fact that he's a part owner, the fact that he's embedded in the community, and he's able to learn all those things. Now, whether that's applicable, whether he could bring a team with him to San Jose, whether he'll have the ability or the freedom to build a club kind of holistically, I don't really know. But the situation he's in right now, he's learning a lot about a bunch of different pieces. And I think that's a unique position compared to most coaches who are maybe first-team assistants for 10 years, and then get a head coaching opportunity. And it's probably a little bit different than being an assistant coach.
No, I love that you bring that insight into this, because there's something to be said about not skipping steps. And we'll use another one of our former teammates and one of our friends, Ben Olsen, who went from playing for DC United forever to retiring, being the assistant coach under Kurt Onalfo, and then within 6 months was the head coach, and then had that job for 10 years, something crazy. And I think that he missed some valuable steps in the development process in terms of talking to younger players and how you talk to them, probably a little bit different than you talk to your veterans, and how to push the right buttons and to get all that going. And
I would assume he learned it along the way, but probably
Sure.
looks back at like, man, perhaps there was, and like you do with anything, perhaps there was wasted moments that had I had that knowledge, I could have handled this better, or we could have gotten this performance, we could have gotten this outcome if I had a little bit more hands-on experience, right?
Yeah, no, I use him as an example. As you know, there are many players out there actually that I've just former players like, dude, how does Ben Olsen just get a job without even having to work for it? You know, and yeah, some of it's timing, and obviously his history and legacy with the club and everything that he's done, and you know, it just kind of fell into his lap. We could argue he didn't. I don't remember him winning anything. You know, so it's not like he turned that into success, but. I don't know. It's interesting. And I also like that Rodrigo said that paying the younger coaches the most, because imagine if you and I, Heath, were at our local club or whatever, and we had the U10s. How stoked would the U12 coach be once we handed off those players to him? They would be just be so much farther along. He wouldn't have to worry about, you know, technical stuff. I mean, there would be some technical stuff to refine, but ultimately he could start to get into more advanced tactics because of how far along that is. So I totally understand and get that you should be paying some of the top coaches, and they should be desiring those younger players in the younger age groups because one, well, that's where the money is, but also because it's so formidable. It's so important, because if you have players that already have the technical, the tactical, the understanding of the physical, and then start to work towards understanding how to manage the mental, right? I mean, even that's a huge component of it. It's crazy.
Yeah, but you also want coaches who want to coach U12, right? You want coaches who go, I know what a U12 player is going through. I know what their physical limitations are. I know as they start to transition into puberty or adulthood for both boys and girls. I know what they're going through. I know how to handle this. I know how to train them. I know what they're capable of. I know what their limitations are. I know how to push them. But if you're constantly jumping around U12 to U16, and I was doing that in my B license, sometimes I would train with my 12s and 13s, and sometimes I'd go see the 16s and 17s, and sometimes I'd jump in with a session to support something, and completely different expectations, right? And this wide range of, you know, who's more developed than the other. And so I know it's a little bit of a side topic, but you want to get to a point where coaches have played well.
Do you ever coach or go out and see college kids, MLS, whatever age, but just a little bit older, and you can see where those kids miss some key development? Where I'll leave with one player nameless, but there's a player that I'm coaching on my USL League 2 team, the Glens, and he just can't adapt to what's being asked. And I wonder, like, do you learn that at age 12? Is it 13? You know, like, there was some key development step that he completely missed out on. And I don't know, even though we work with him and talk with him, if he can get it back, because it's like, I don't understand. I don't know if he's being stubborn or if he just can't adapt to the ideas that I'm trying to implant in him. I still want him to be himself. I'm not trying to make him a robot, but can he play within the confines of the parameters that I'm trying to set? It's really interesting. Anyway, here's a question for you. This is a great one. Which current MLS player do you think would make a great coach? Is there anybody out there right now that you think he's got the goods? It's just a matter. It's almost like we're just watching him do his thing now, but it's only setting him up to be a great coach. Anybody that wants to hit us up on the comments and YouTube, do it. Hit us up on Twitter, ISWT Pod. Make sure you drop us a follow there as well, so that you can hit us up and let us know who you think would be a great coach, current MLS player. Go ahead.
I mean, for me, when I think about somebody of like, what could they do next, and where are they synonymous with how I view them? And Dax McCarty's a guy that I'm like, oh, that's a guy that's synonymous with being on the field, right? Signed when he was 18, 19 years old in the league, has been a lifer in MLS, understands all of these things, but it just feels at home in a training grounds, right? At home on the field, at home, understanding the banter, kind of almost like raised in the kind of our first generation of players raised in these professional environments that I know he could do TV and he could do other things because he's got a great personality. But when I think about him, when I think about kind of all the tools that he has from a personality standpoint to the experiences and the ability to apply them, he's good at messaging. He's good at interpreting. He's good at digesting information. He's good at sharing information. I'm like, that's a guy. It's just off the top of my head because they're playing against LAFC this weekend. So I'm thinking about him, but he's one that I think is on the latter part of his career that I could see going straight into, a coaching environment and probably at the professional ranks. Not sure about the youth professional environment or the academy level, but he's one that is the top of my head. I mean, it's a great stream of consciousness question. Is there anybody that you have?
Well, it's interesting. You said Dax McCarty's the first person that popped into my head too. Not only because he's cute as a button, we got to give a shout out to Dax McCarty, but because of the experiences that he's accrued. He also was on the roster for that game that we didn't qualify in 2018 in Trinidad. Like he's seen some pretty bad stuff. And I think what's important for that, and you and I have been a part of those, either losing big to an international opponent or having successes and beating somebody that maybe we shouldn't have, with you and Charlie against Spain. You get to see what happens in the locker room afterwards. You get to see what happens when the coach and how they're handling different situations, whether it's Bruce Arena, Bob Bradley, whoever it may be, Jurgen Klinsmann. And I think that's really important to the development of your own coaching, because you put yourself in the shoes of the coach. What would I have said in this moment? Like, I'll give you an example. World Cup 2006, we're playing Ghana. We have to win the last game to get into the round of 16 and play against Brazil. Okay, it's all kind of set and ready for us to go. It's going to be amazing. And we try to build on the 2002 success. Yeah. So we go down 1-0. Claudio Reyna, I think he gets fouled, doesn't call it, gets stripped of the ball. They score 1-0. Okay, Claudio goes out, which absolutely crushed us. And so we end up scoring. DeMarcus plays it across, steals his own ball, plays it to Clint, 1-1. So we're like a minute away from halftime. We give up the shadiest penalty of all time. But at that halftime, we were down 2-1, and you could just feel the whole locker room. Just nobody knew what to say. And all like we had the momentum. We got back into the game. We gave ourselves a chance, and then we didn't. And nobody knew. And I wonder, should Bruce have said something more than what he did? I mean, he didn't really say much because everybody was so shocked at how bad the call was, and we were so deflated. Like, should I have said something? I mean, I wasn't, not that I wasn't one of the leaders, but I felt like I needed to hear from a Claudio, the captains, and the Eddie Popes and the Frankie Hayduks and Landon and Bees, the guys that had been there before, So I kind of didn't say anything, but I didn't know what I was going to say. It was going to be more rah-rah. Like, there's nothing we can do about it. Let's move forward. So I always kind of try to put myself in those situations and figure out what I would do different. And these things inform how you coach. But I don't know. It's interesting. When I think about some of the oldest players in MLS, you got Drew Moore, 38. I don't know, Drew. Got Kai Kamara, Johnny Bornstein. He's 37. Brad Guzan's 37. Jeff Cameron, 37. Sasha Kleshchin, he might not be, but Ozzy Alonso, Diego Chara. I mean, those guys are, I'm curious. I mean, there's a lot of goalkeepers here. When I look at the list, Graham Zusi, I don't know if it's Steven Benishore might be a good one, though. Bedoya, I'll go with Alejandro Bedoya, 35 years old. I think he'd make a fantastic coach. I've worked my way into that one. I'm going to say Alejandro Bedoya.
Okay. I mean, we've got a Michael Bradley shout in here, too. I could definitely see Michael going straight into.
Oh, he'll go into it. Yeah. No question.
In terms of like that being the next step, for sure. But he's also a guy that could just take some time. He's made plenty of money to just sort of figure out what he wants to do, or he could coach at the kids level, or he could just be disenamored by the industry, having lived in it since he was like a young child. But yeah, Bedoya is a good call. I could see Bedoya getting into other things though, because he's already involved in a lot of things from an investment standpoint. Not to say you couldn't do both, because I'm sure it's not all hands on. But yeah, I'm thinking through that lens of who's currently in MLS that could do that. Was there any guy, Jimmy, that you were like, at the very beginning? Because this one time I went and talked to John T. Whitehead. Do you remember John T. at Fox?
Yeah, I remember John T. Yep.
And he was talking about how the talent pool at Fox Sports was He only wanted to start hiring people that wanted to be analysts. Like, I want you to be the best analyst you can be. That's who I want in here. But he was talking about how there's a number of guys that are an analyst until they become a coach, or they're an analyst until they get to the front office job. And he was mentioning a number of players that, or a number of talent that worked with him that were there until the next job came. They were there because they liked it. It paid the bills, but their real passion lied in somewhere else. And I felt, now part of me understood that because you need to make a living and all those things, but I felt like we were a little bit, that these people were cheating themselves potentially if they truly wanted to do something. And I know that the economic means are very different. TV pays fantastically for these guys. But if you want to be a great coach, then you've got to be coaching. You've got to be coaching, right? You cannot just be doing something else and think when the right job comes, when the right whatever comes, then I'm going to make it happen. But otherwise, I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for the perfect opportunity. I'm waiting for the perfect wave, and the perfect wave never comes. And I feel like that was a little bit disappointing to me to hear. It's the reality. It wasn't like that was like some huge news to me, but it was interesting to hear him say, "I want analysts that want to be the best analysts that they can be."
That sounds
and
like a proper
for coaches.
I want
somebody. Yeah, I want somebody who wants to be the best coach that they can be. And how can I be the best coach, or how can I not train and then be the best player I want to be? And there was something to that I thought was really powerful. And that our next generation of coaches, and a lot of that's on the infrastructure of the U.S. isn't there yet. But for us to have the best players, we're going to have better coaches. To have better coaches, those coaches are going to have to be coaching and putting the time in. I understand, again, the economics of that aren't always that easy to be able to go work a full-time job and then get your coaching reps in. There are ways to do it, but we're all in much more fortunate positions than most people are, and I still understand the economics can be tough.
No, that's great. That's fantastic, actually. And it kind of leads into one of the big things that I tell kids and parents that want to know, like, how did you become a professional? I just didn't skip any steps. Everybody's looking for this shortcut to success, the shortcut to get to the top. Well, the shortcut is there are no shortcuts. That's the hardest thing for people to understand and to realize, is that they want to know a little bit more. They're willing to pay thousands and thousands of dollars. I had this dad nearby where I live. I'm going to share the story, then we can get into U.S. men's national team talk. But there's this dad who's like, I'm going to send my kid down to Taiwichi down in Bolivia. I'm in Northern California. Okay. And I'm going to pay $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, to get down there. And I'm like, dude, he's 9. I'll go take you to a wall nearby that has a flat surface, and you're going to get just as much out of that, if not more, because there's not as much pressure on him, and he can make mistakes and not feel like he's being judged, to have a safe space to develop. That's going to probably have more impact as he starts to create his own identity of how he wants to play, as opposed to being thrown into this thing. And it's no disrespect to Taiwichi, and they've already produced world-class players many times over, but it just felt like an unnecessary cost. But that's what everybody's looking for. They're looking for, they're willing to pay for that. And that I find that to be very, very interesting. All right, we're going to take our first and only break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some U.S. men's national team news that's really driven around this one quote from Greg Berhalter. So don't go anywhere.
Hold your breath.
Brianna Scurry. She was, before Venus and Serena, she broke the molds.
You're looking at a game that already doesn't have a lot of black women, and she's dominating.
One of the greatest we've ever seen in the world.
I experienced life in its hardest.
I was in the depths of hell, and somebody threw me a lifeline.
We're not turning back.
Welcome back to In Soccer We Trust. I'm Jimmy Conrad alongside Hollywood Heath Pierce. Unfortunately, Chuck Wagon, Charlie Davies is not with us today, but I do have some news for everybody. And I meant to mention this, at the top of the show, but we've been nominated for the best sports podcast category in the People's Choice Podcast Awards. We'd appreciate if you guys could take 60 seconds to nominate us. All right. You go to podcastawards.com/app/sign up, and then toggle down and find the sports category, and then pick us. The whole process, as I mentioned, takes about a minute. We've included the link at the top of the episode description as well. We're trying to win more trophies, trying to get more trophies in our cabinet. It's a good feeling. And you guys would be a part of it. You're part of the team. So we would really appreciate any help and support on that. We appreciate you. All right. Heath Pierce, there's this quote from Greg Berhalter that I have to read to you because I think it's interesting. We saw it today, and it was really, really interesting. He says, I think it's important to note Now, Greg Berhalter, for everybody that doesn't know, is the manager of the U.S. men's national team, the head boss, the big cheese, the top enchilada. I got all those wrong. I think it's important to note that some recent transfers from MLS came too early. Think about Brian Reynolds, who left FC Dallas, who went to Roma, or George Bello. There's an argument to be made that he could have stayed in MLS and dominated the league and then moved. So there's a number of guys who I'm concerned are leaving too early. He said that recently to ESPN. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree. I think we are going to get to a point where we sort of reach max whatever of players going to Europe, and there's a trend in that because we see a Weston McKennie go into Schalke and work his way in as a teenager to a starter, and now is at Juventus, and we see a number of these players, including Josh Sargent, who did well at Werder Bremen over his time there. But it doesn't mean all players are ready to go to Europe. When I left Denmark, and I'll use that as my MLS example because it's more comparable than when I was in Germany at the time, I probably wasn't ready. And there was a coach that was telling me, "Hey, you're not ready." This guy's name's Morten Vikhorst. He had just retired, and he had become, actually, Jimmy, funny enough, a head coach very quickly after retiring from his time at Celtic and Brøndby. And he was like, "Hey, you need to trust in the process." I hadn't really believed the club was mature enough to really guide me towards my next move. I thought that they were just trying to get me for cheap because it was a wildly different salary between where I was in Denmark and where I was going to be in the Bundesliga. And I probably wasn't ready yet. But for me, you never let a weakness in, right, Jimmy? You don't think clearly when you're a player. You go, me, that guy, no problem. I'll go challenge for that starting spot at Roma. I'll go. Okay, I can play here. I can do that. And so, of course, you never really let in those weaknesses, and that's why you need a team around you of mentors. Now, I think this is no disrespect to agents, but I never had a mentor that was an agent. Never had one. And I was thinking about this the other day. You can't,
because they're motivated differently than a mentor. Like, they're, of course, why wouldn't you move to Europe? Because they're going to get a bigger cut than maybe they'd get in MLS.
But I do think agencies should have these mentors. And they should have these where players can have somebody they can talk to on a regular basis to guide them, to help reset. And, there's mental health coaches and sports psychologists and all these things that are important as well. But within the context of these things, somebody needs to be able to tell Brian Reynolds, "Hey, man, you are hyped. You're worth something. Believe me, when the time is right, we're going to move you on. You're not going to miss out on the money." And actually, maybe you do. That's the risk you have to be willing to take. But now Brian Reynolds is, a year now of wasted time in terms of his player development.
I was going to say he might be in the wastelands of lower division, not lower division, but lower table Belgium football.
Yeah, and that's not even as good as MLS, the bottom of the Belgian league. And that's a problem. Now he's stuck there. Yeah, he has the freedom to move a lot easier than MLS because the problem with MLS, and they're starting to reward these players now, is you'll get the salary Jesus Ferreira's gotten. I think Brian Reynolds probably would have gotten a new deal worth something. But there's still the salary cap structure that you wouldn't necessarily want to pay a right back $750,000 to stay in your league who's a teenager. So you move him on, you get the money, you reinvest it into the academy. It's a good system for FC Dallas. But for Brian Reynolds, like, he went to a massive club. Where was he ever going to fit in for a player that green? He wasn't like some phenom in MLS. He wasn't killing MLS. You just saw flashes of what could be. His next move needed to be somewhere where you could start to bring that potential to reality. And that's going to be through training and playing high-level matches, which he could have done had he stayed in MLS. And I fully agree with Greg Berhalter on a lot of those comments. I think a lot of these players are being pushed before they're ready. But the only way to really know that they're not ready is to the people around them, because the players think they're not ready.
Well, let me talk. Let's do devil's advocate then, because I think for everybody that might be watching or listening, when are you ready? Because there is some element of sink or swim time. At some point, you have to get yourself into a situation where you're going to test and get you out of your comfort zone. Where am I good enough to play in this situation? And if I'm not, how do I fight my way through that? I think there's something to be said about that resiliency that comes from, hey, it's actually not going my way in Europe. And we're seeing a little bit with Eric Palmer-Brown, who's been on our show before and talked about it. And I was really still thrilled about his transparency about the whole process. Goes from Sporting Kansas City to Manchester City and immediately gets loaned out, as they do when you're at one of the big clubs that doesn't have a lot of room for younger players to develop with the first team or near the first team. And he's trying to fight his way back to relevancy to try to maybe, whether he goes back to City or not, it's almost secondary at this point. Can he at least go to a club somewhere in the top 5 leagues and do something of consequence? And he's doing that now with Troyes. I'm curious to see how the first half of the season starts in Liga. But even then, he's developing some resiliency that I don't know if you can liken to some of the environments that you get here in MLS.
Yeah, but he was always going to be part of a loan system. Going through City Football Group, the writing's on the wall. He's not going to City, right?
Well, that's like Miazga at Chelsea. Though,
yeah, Chelsea and City are
they did get a chance though. They did get a chance.
Yeah,
he did get a chance for a little bit.
He did, but like you're competing with Andreas Christensen at that time. That you were never going to take that spot. And he did have that chance, but I think for City or Chelsea, unique because they're famous for their player signings and then the loan deals that they do. Chelsea most famously, and now City doing the same thing with a lot of their CFG players. But okay, let's talk about Busio, for example. Then did Busio go at the right time? I think that was the right challenge for him.
Yeah.
He was in and out of a lineup all year long.
Sure.
He had sort of reached the ceiling of what I think SKC was going to challenge him at. He was a sure starter. And I think the hard part is that the moment a player in MLS is no longer challenged or stimulated to have to compete for a starting spot, I think the risk of sending them too early is far. I think that is more important for them to go than be in a situation where they know they're going to play every week. And unless they're a personality type has to be able to be self-motivating, and then you can get the most out of them in MLS. But if the challenge that they have, the self-challenges that they have in MLS are no longer fundamental to their growth, then I think they do need to move. And I think that's also a problem in terms of depth in MLS for Brian Reynolds. Well, okay, maybe Justin Che, but and they probably knew they had a player coming up under him to slot in there, but he wasn't challenging for a spot at that point. So that's hard, right?
Well, Busio, so let me speak specifically to Busio. It did feel like the timing was right. But what was happening in Sporting Kansas City was that they were playing him at a 6. And that's a whole different position to learn than playing the 8 or the 10. And I don't think he was getting as many reps as he possibly could. There's no doubt the guy can play. I mean, he can play, he can combine, he's good in transition. He's cool and calm and collected on the ball. If I'm a defender and I have that type of guy in front of me, I'm excited because I know he's probably going to be able to play out of it no matter what kind of ball I give him. And that was always a big thrill to play with those types of players. And Claudio Reyna and John O'Brien really stand out as the two that I really enjoyed playing with the most in that type of thing. And I think Busio has elements of his game that are like that, but I still don't know if he had mastered the position yet. To Greg's point, he didn't dominate in MLS yet. He was good, and you could see his potential. And when he got over to Venezia, when he got his moments to shine and play in his best spots, we saw it. He has the quality, and that's why Greg continued to call him in. I still wonder if maybe another year in MLS. Now, obviously, the timing of the contracts and when you're free to go, you got to take a risk at some point. Had
Venezia, by the way, been better, then maybe the situation. Like there is some things that when you're in a dumpster fire, that is relegation battles, all bets are off. I've been in that. It sucks. Maybe it could have been to a club a tier higher that was a little more in his control based on his performances versus like interchanging coaches, interchanging players, doing whatever it takes to looking into a magic 8 ball to figure out how you're going to stay in the league.
Okay, so a lot of these, this quote from Greg Berhalter didn't get us motivated to talk about it, but also Chuck Booth, one of our CBS Sports family journalists who wrote a big article on it on CBSSports.com. You can find it, but he used this quote and then he said, taking a look at these words from Greg Berhalter, he did a grading system from all the U.S. men's national team players from January 2021 to January 2022 and gave it an A to F. So it's a pretty good read. He talked about Daryl Dike, gave it a D, just because I think Dike, when he went to go to West Brom, his old coach at Barnsley, where he did have a good stint, was there. Now that guy got fired. Steve Bruce is in. Now Daryl Dike just scored recently in a friendly, and Steve Bruce says he's still raw. He's got it in bits. And it wasn't the most glowing review about Daryl Dike, which makes me a little bit nervous. But if he can stay healthy, obviously he's a threat, and that's been proven. But a D is pretty strong. Brendan Aronson, he gave an A. That's pretty obvious. I think there's an interesting course that Brendan Aronson took with going to RB Salzburg, which felt like a nice stepping stone. And we see a lot of South Americans go to Portugal first before they kind of get into a top 5 league. And I think Brendan Aronson had a similar course there. I'm curious to see if his brother Paxton will do the same. Josh Sargent, he gave an F. From Werder Bremen and Norwich City. I'll just go with those 3 guys first. We'll take these in chunks. Do you agree with these grades with D for DK, an A for Aronson, and an F for Sargent?
I mean, I think we aren't that impressed with the move to a championship for any striker now that's in our national team pool. I think the injury hasn't helped him either. The problem also in the championship is that you can have things in bits and do really, really well, especially if those bits are physicality, your ability to score goals and be busy in a box, you know, and you're not necessarily honing or shaping into a star striker for a national team level. I think you learn a different type of soccer in the championship than you do in the Premier League. And so I can understand that. I liked the move to the championship because he did so well. And it is a testing ground that had he done well, or had he not been injured and been able to put in these performances, that could lead to something bigger for him down the line. Now, I've never really thought DK had a huge upside. I think he has a lot of tools, but in terms of like how you compare him to Ricardo Pepi, I'm like, there's not really a comparison to them in terms of being strikers, but DK could catch fire and move to a bigger club. So I feel like that was maybe a little bit harsh of a grade for him, but Daryl DK was relatively irrelevant over the last 12 months, right? For a number of factors. And so I can understand why you've dropped down. But Sargent as well, like that to me was like, that was an early 2000s move for an American player. Do you
think it was just the pull of the Premier League that why Sargent left? I mean, obviously going from Bundesliga 2 when Werder Bremen got relegated to going to the Premier League, where probably Norwich. All in all, even the bookies are like, yeah, they're going straight back down. But there's that. I mean, I remember Benny Faulhaber did it when he went to Derby, and then Derby had like the worst season in Premier League history, and he said it was like the worst experience of his life.
Yeah.
I mean, what I think is interesting. Here's my question. Then let's rephrase this one for Josh Sargent. Do you think he became a better player by that whole Norwich City season and where he is now playing in the championship?
Do you think
he's learned? He's got.
If you mark it as a year,
something.
If he left now, I would say he became a better player from it because he's going to learn a lot during that year. Now, would I have liked for him to be in a Bundesliga environment for another year that was challenging? Yeah, but if he was going to go to like a Arminia Bielefeld or something like that, no, I don't think he's. I think the situation he was in, he's going to learn a lot. Now, if he stays there for 2 years, then I'm like, okay, now you've wasted 2 years. It's kind of like this. You get a little window for his age to be able to learn something and gain some valuable tools of like fighting, scrapping, the mentality that you have to have, the things that come out of the stresses of being in an environment like that. But if he stays there again for another year, then I'm like, nah, time wasted.
Okay, so the benefit of hindsight, do you feel like not just the people that are on social media around the U.S. men's national team, but the coaching staff, if he had stayed in the Bundesliga 2, because in his first game for Werder Bremen, he scored 2 goals before he left to go to Norwich. Say he stayed in the Bundesliga 2 and helped Werder Bremen get promoted back to the top flight. How much more momentum? I mean, he might have had 15, 20 goals in the second Bundesliga, and everybody's like, Josh Sargent's the guy. And now look at, he led Werder Bremen back to I mean, it's really interesting how things can get spun. But because he had a positive experience, because he went out there and performed in a tough environment, got results, and helped the team. He led a team to getting back to being promoted. I wonder what that would have looked like for him on a personal level and his standing within the national team if he had just stayed and kind of saw it out with Werder Bremen.
Oh, by the way, there's a good shout in here from Meg Durr. Hoppy, worst transfer of last year. I don't disagree. I mean, he was injured for most of the year, but like,
yeah, he got an F here from Chuck Booth as well.
That was another one where it was a lot of hype, and he's actually a player I was really excited about. But again, you talk about bits and pieces. He's about as raw as they come in terms of like a polished product, but that energy and that fight that he has was pretty invigorating for the national team when he was doing it well. But Sargent, yeah, I mean, second Bundesliga could have been good for him, but there's so many factors that go into this that they might place him on the transfer list because they know they can get money for him, right? When you go down, then you go, well, we've got to shed some weight here and keep some of our tools that we think will get us back up and move some of the what we consider dead weight or surplus to requirements here. And so there's a lot of factors that they could have leveraged that and been like, hey man, you're on the outs with us. We need to move you. And then you go into the world of transfers and who can afford it, who can pay for it, where should I go? And then you get kind of stuck. It's not always as easy as being a good player. You get options or you get to stay and play, right? There's a lot more factors that go into it, especially a club that's in a bit of peril, which Werder Bremen were getting relegated. The size, I mean, when I was in the Bundesliga, Werder Bremen were a Champions League club every year. They were averaging 70 points a season. They were massive. Mesut Ozil was coming up through the ranks there, but they had big national team players playing for Werder Bremen consistently. And so for them to go down, that's a massive failure. So you can understand what the club was going through, that they're trying to change things around. But I mean, to go back to the original point with Greg Berhalter, I agree. I think that it's always going to be this pendulum swinging, right? We went from being like selling no clubs, all players stay here. We're not a selling club, to being like sell everyone. And I think it's going to swing back again to being a little bit more balanced, to selling players at the right time to the right clubs. I actually do think, and this is a great one, Jimmy, is look at Paxton Aronson. Doesn't play for the Union, but somebody wants him, right? And so this is another.
Same with Caden Clark with the Red Bulls.
Yeah.
I mean, even though he signed with RB Leipzig, he doesn't play for his club team, but does well for the U20s.
So you wonder, like, what is the right situation for them, right? And this is a different conversation because Paxton's not playing, so you're measuring that versus going to Salzburg, which he's linked to. Is that a better move for him? Maybe Salzburg's definitely going to have much more of a reason to play him and develop him than Philadelphia Union, who have got a good team. They're close to top of the league right now. They've gotten a lot of draws, but Paxton Aronson or the young players in the Philadelphia Union, even though they have this strong academy, are not being used in the way that you would think they would in this situation, or given the club's sort of philosophy.
Gavin says he wants Paxton to join Leeds. Let's tap the brakes there, Paxton. Gavin, excuse me. I would say with Paxton, he has the benefit of his brother kind of laying the foundation of what people should expect from an Aronson. And he's already shown it. You can see it in the U20s that he's got that same type of drive and ambition, and they see the game very similarly. Obviously, he's going to have a couple different components to their game, but I'm not saying that he's a known quantity, but even if he's not playing for the Union, I think you kind of have an idea of what he's going to be about, given that how they both grew up. So I think his brother has done him a service. Now let's talk about another player that you mentioned that also got an F from Mr. Chuck Booth. Chuck Booth just throwing out the Fs like no big deal. Hoppy was one of them.
Who was the other one you said?
It was Matthew Hoppy, Josh Sargent, and this last one, Ricardo Pepi. He gave an F to Ricardo Pepi.
Yeah.
And, obviously, as Chuck says, his struggles are well chronicled. They had teams like Wolfsburg and Atletico Madrid were inquiring about Ricardo Pepi. I mean, the guy was in a great run of form.
Ajax and Hilarious left, and I mean, Ajax is always going to have a pipeline of good young stars, but at least you're in a stable situation where you go like, I'll go punch for punch with anybody. Like that self-belief has a lot more value in an Ajax system than it does in a relegation fighting Bundesliga team.
Well, let's catch you up on what's happening with Augsburg. They fired their coach and they brought in, his name is Enrique Maaßen. Or Maben. I'm doing my best here. It's kind of the weird German B.
Oh, Maaßen.
And Maaßen. Okay, so I was right the first time. Enrico Maaßen. And his last job was coaching the Borussia Dortmund reserves. And he did it well. They actually gave him a contract until 2024, but he jumped. And they gave him a bigger and better contract because he was doing so well and got them promoted to the third league, 3 Liga in Germany. But he left to take this Augsburg job. And I like this for Ricardo Pepi because this is a coach that clearly, he's only 38. This is a coach that clearly knows how to work with younger players. And I think that's going to do a great deal of good for Ricardo Pepi in a lot of different ways. But also they just got rid of Grigoric, who was like their number 9. He could play underneath as well, but he led the team in goals last year for Augsburg with 9. He's gone. And he's going to Freiburg because he wanted to get a little taste of Europe. Freiburg wanted him a couple years ago, and now he's had the chance to do it. But they made a straight swap. So Freiburg ends up giving over Ermedin Demirovic. Excuse me. He's a 24-year-old striker, Bosnian international, and 2 goals and 3 assists in 31 appearances last year. I think only 9 starts for Freiburg. But Freiburg was good, finished 6th in the Bundesliga, so clearly had an impact. So there's still, it's not like Grigoric has just left and they didn't fill the hole. Then Ricardo Pepi can fill that void, Heath. They got somebody coming in, but I think there's some signs pointing to him getting better, getting some more valuable minutes, maybe hopefully being played in his best spot. I know they played him wide a lot just to try to get him on the field. I feel like Ricardo Pepi is going to score a few goals, and he needs to get that first one. He hasn't scored since October in a meaningful competition. So it's really important for him to do that.
We know coaches can make and break careers. And when I was again, to go back to a little anecdote to my experience, we brought in Germany during my sort of 5-coach run over 2 years. The former Dieter Eilts was his name. He's former national team player, was the U21 national team coach that had done fantastic with Germany in the Euros. And he struggled at the first team level because he didn't understand. He had been in this environment where a little more discipline, a little bit more, coach and subordinates in terms of young players. He was great with young players within the club, but he struggled with some of the bigger egos. And so from a coaching level there's a transition there, right? From the reserves to a first team because of the type of players you're going to have around and the egos. But for a guy like Ricardo Pepi, who's the age that he is, that's a fantastic situation for him to be in. If he can earn that respect and that trust, or if that coach has that patience to go, you know what, I'm not going to judge him based on a final product. I'm going to work with him. And maybe Pepi's going to have some bad days, or maybe he's going to have a bad attitude from time to time. but I'm going to work with him because I want to get the most out of that player versus other coaches that go, nah, I'll just go with somebody else. And if they're in a stable situation, you now have the ability to do that. Now, again, if they're fighting relegation, then one's in, one's out. You're going to go with whoever has the hot hand. It's different, but I think that could be it's best case scenario for him staying at Augsburg, I guess I would say.
Listen, I'm just happy that things changed because the situation he currently was in wasn't great. And so I'm glad the coach, and remember when Parkhurst came on, Michael Parkhurst came on and said, I was coached by that guy when I went to Augsburg. And yeah, he's not a great coach. He wouldn't be a good fit for Ricardo Pepi. And we all just laughed. Like, why wouldn't Pepi or anybody like do that type of research to know where he was going and what he was inheriting, what situation? But I know that it's difficult at times, especially if you have a chance to make a big move and you can take care of your family in one fell swoop and you have a chance to go to a top 5 league in Europe. I get it. But he maybe would have benefited from staying in MLS for at least one more year. But maybe Jesus Ferreira wouldn't have emerged as the guy for FC Dallas like he is now. All right, some other transfer news. Let's go the other way, though. This is kind of looking back and what's in place for some of those guys that have to fight through some situations that aren't great. But we got Malik Tillman, who was with Bayern Munich. We got called him into the last 4 games for the U.S. men's national team in June. Apparently heading to Rangers. I want to get your thoughts on that. And then Shaq Moore leaving Tenerife in Spain to sign with Nashville. I thought that was a pleasant surprise. And kind of, I guess in some ways, I wanted to ask you about Greg Berhalter's comments in different ways. Like now, Brandon Vasquez crushing it, 10 goals and 4 assists for Cincinnati. You have Jeremy Ebobisi's got 11 goals and 1 assist for the San Jose Earthquakes.
Both not selected for the All-Star team.
They got selected to the All-Star team. Both of those guys
did not get selected.
Oh, did not get selected, which is weird, but not weird when you think of the big names that are in.
Yeah.
But you have those 2 guys that are kind of doing what Greg Berhalter is saying is stay in the league and dominate the league, and that could give you a better chance. Maybe that's intimated. I'm kind of putting words in Greg's mouth there, but interesting thing. So you got Shaq Moore coming to Nashville, coming back to MLS to get some minutes. We'll see if that helps him. Maybe playing next to Walker Zimmerman is an added benefit in that regard. What are your thoughts on Tillman, Shaq Moore, and then give me a little bit of insight on Brandon Vasquez and Ebobisi, who've been blowing up. And do you think they have a real chance of maybe sneaking onto this roster?
I mean, I certainly think you bring him in for a look in September, right? Where you just go, well, I'm going to find out.
Those are our 2 last games. Is that the time to
you bring him into camp, you give him a few minutes because if they stay hot through the end of the year or they're in the playoffs, and you're joining the team right leading up to a World Cup with a hot hand, why not bring him? You got 3 extra players now that you can bring into the team or bring into your roster. So I don't think our national team is 26 deep right now in terms of solid positions or ones that are shoo-ins. Now you naturally get to 26 players through depth of saying, okay, now we've got your 18 and who's the next one? You're going to get to 26. We've got plenty of players in the pool. But if a few of those guys have the hot hand, I'm taking them over like, you're kind of just the 26th player in my team versus a guy has been the 30th player or 35th player, but is in incredible form right now and a goal scorer. I'm going with that person. So I think you bring him in for sure.
Even if you don't play them, just to see how they interact with the group and see how they perform, because sometimes those games can be tough when you're only in for a week and you don't really do any like hardcore training,
Yeah, but I'm just trying to think of, again, all I know is the 2010 cycle and you had in that window players who hadn't been in the national team for a long time were defender Clarence Goodson. Attackers were again Robbie Finley, Edson Buttle, and Hercules Gomez, part of the national team pools for a long time, but weren't like key to the qualifying process, weren't key to that, and were important parts of the DNA of that roster, and almost ones that you knew. Robbie Finley a little more surprising, but Edson Buttle in the form that he was in, and Hercules Gomez, you're kind of like they're definitely going. There wasn't like when they were coming up with the roster selection of 23 out of the 30 players of us that were in camp, they weren't 2 players that I questioned whether they'd make the team because of what the potential value could be in a closing minutes or stoppage time or in the second half, or you deplete yourself on the depth chart through injuries or whatever could happen. It made sense. I don't know. What's your take on those players coming in and again, staying in the league? Do you think it's actually as valuable as Greg says, or do you think these are examples of players that are probably not getting the respect because they stayed in the league instead of going somewhere else?
I guess the one thing to bring into the equation for Vasquez and Ebobisi is that were they going to make a move anywhere else? I mean, some of the players that we're referencing are pretty young and have a lot more of that potential attached to them than maybe an Ebobisi and Vasquez. But to your point, and based on history in 2010 in particular, when Bob took those 3 strikers that were just hot hands at the right time. And when we mentioned it with Greg, we've talked about this before, and I had an interview with him. He said, well, all 3 of those players that you mentioned we're all strikers. So it bodes well for those guys if they keep scoring, that they're going to maybe get a look. And let's not be naive. This is not just for our national team, but for national teams around the world. We're going to have a significant injury. Like somebody's going to be out, or two that aren't going to be a part of the World Cup, which is going to be, we already lost Miles Robinson, which has been pretty impactful.
I would say 3 players, Jimmy, 3 players from now that we expect, whether it's from injuries, form, or otherwise.
Isn't that crazy? God, yeah. I can't even wrap my head around which 3 players that are going to be. And I don't even want to get into it right now.
I mean, Oguchi Onyewu shouldn't have gone to the 2010 World Cup because of how injured he was, but he went. But that was a player that we were like, oh man, that's a big name player.
Right.
I mean, he was still sort of in rehab and like hobbling around at our.
Yeah, he wasn't 100%, not even close.
Yeah. And he went because you use a spot hoping that this guy who's been so big for the national team could come in and figure it out. But generally speaking, that was one that could have dropped out. Steve Cherundolo dropped out of a World Cup, and I think Frankie Hayden ended up going. And you look back at history, and there's a number of guys. A lot of those stories happened in like the pre-camp, which is crazy.
Right. Well, Chris Armas ducked out of 2002, and Pablo Mastroianni jumped in, and then all of a sudden Pablo had a great game against Portugal, and everybody's like, "Who's this Pablo Mastroianni guy?" You know.
But if you think about
that's what happens.
Yeah, 20 to 30 games from now, it's part of the game. So you might lose 1 or 2 players, or you might,
which is intense.
Something. And it could be a simple, Jimmy. It's not. We're not talking about ACLs. It could be a hamstring.
Right.
Hamstring. 6 weeks.
Right.
You miss the tournament. Right. Yeah. You come back right after the tournament. You go and you continue your career. It doesn't have to be some sort of like 6-8 month out major injury. It's the timing of things. You pull up. And
I don't know if I can emotionally handle any of our big players getting hurt, but we do have a penchant for whatever reason with this young team that we do have some guys getting hurt quite often, more often than I would like. All right, with regard to Shaq Moore, I think it's a good move for him. If he wasn't going to get minutes, if he couldn't find a team to get into maybe La Liga itself, maybe didn't want to swim in the waters of La Liga 2, gets himself in a team that's next to a national team defender in Walker Zimmerman. They play a good style of defense in particular. He'll be able to get forward. I think he'd be a nice addition to Nashville. And then with Malik Tillman, with Joe Rebo leaving Rangers, I think that opens up some space in the middle of midfield for him to potentially fill that void. I mean, I think he's going to obviously have competition, but Gio von Bronckhorst is a great coach. I like what Rangers did and almost got to become champions of the Europa League. So there's something there within that team. And when you have that type of success, of course, bigger clubs are going to come in and poach your best players. But that could be a good spot for Malik Tillman to get in there and hopefully be trusted in a meaningful way to get some responsibility from a coach that knows what he's doing and obviously has plenty of experience from playing himself. So I think these are all good moves for these guys. They seem positive, and hopefully they can turn them in to something very special. All right, Heath Pierce, final thoughts before we let everybody go here on In Soccer We Trust. And we appreciate you. If you're still listening, that means you really, really love us.
No, I mean, my final thought is that you look at a Shaq Moore and the clubs that they're in, 99% of the clubs around the world, take out the Champions League clubs, and the top Champions League clubs have less resource, have worse facilities, have worse infrastructure than what Major League Soccer has to offer. Now, if you're a good young pro and you're coming in, Shaq Moore's 25 years old, he's going to come back into a situation where he's going to have access to medical differently, access to a training room, access to facilities and resources and things that you didn't have before. In terms of being a top level pro and taking care of your body, it's the right situation to be in. And so while the risk is differently when you go to Europe, the infrastructure and all the tools that you have to be the best player you can be are far greater in the MLS off the field than anywhere else, plus the quality of life. It's really hard to turn down. So I get it.
Yeah, and my final thought is for the U.S. women's national team, everybody, they got to the final of the CONCACAF W Championship. They're taking on Canada. We haven't lost. I'm speaking as the U.S. women's national team. We haven't lost since we lost to Canada in the Olympics in the semifinal. We got the bronze medal ultimately, and they got the gold. It's time for revenge, and that game is happening on Monday night. Make sure you take some time to watch. It's going to be on Paramount Plus. And it's at 9 p.m. Eastern. So I just want to give a shout out to our ladies, and hopefully they can do the business and get the revenge. All right,
also,
we're done.
Jimmy, wait. Shout out to our broadcast team down there in Paramount Plus as well, sitting out there in the sun. I saw those umbrellas with them.
Woo.
They are sweating it out on location, which I think is a great commitment to the sport to have the broadcast team on location for this tournament. It's awesome. So all the best.
Yeah, it's great in so many different ways. Make sure you support the ladies. If you're from Canada, make sure you support your ladies as well. It's going to be a great game between two teams that haven't given up a goal in the tournament so far, all the way to the final, haven't given up a goal, both Canada and the U.S. women. So it's going to be a fantastic game because we know that goals are going to be scored. It's going to be tight, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you watch that. And thank you for listening and watching In Soccer We Trust. We will see you next week with 3 exciting episodes like always. So on behalf of producer Des, producer Alex, Charlie Chuck Wagon Davies, who isn't here, he's playing hooky, Hollywood Heath Pierce, I'm Jimmy Conrad. saying goodbye. We'll see you later.